Right, good afternoon. Today, for our Public Sector Catering Most Influential short interview, we're being joined by Alexia Robinson, Head of Love British Food, which runs the annual British Food Fortnight celebration of all the good produce that's produced in this country. She's also one of our Public Sector Catering Most Influential people for 2022, and we thank her very much for joining us today. Hello, Alexia.
Hello, David.
Right. Let's crack on. I mean, from your point of view, the way you see the industry, what are the biggest challenges you see facing public sector catering?
Well, we're at quite a turning point at the moment, aren't we, in this country? There are huge challenges, but I want to use a more positive word as well, to say that for every challenge, I truly believe there are opportunities. And it's very easy to look at the challenges, which we know are around the increased food costs and tremendous uncertainty with supply, and the huge pressure that all of that has on the people working in the public sector catering side of things. But I also think we are at a really exciting time in the sector. I've now worked in the sector for many years, actually, which is why it's so lovely being on the public sector industry group, because many of those people are my friends. We've all worked together for ages, and when I talk to everyone, everybody feels that we are entering a period where the next 3 to 5 years are going to be a game changer. And perhaps we needed to get to this acute period of time where we have these huge issues with price and uncertainty of supply and pressure on people. Maybe we need to get to that point where those then become the catalysts for change. Because what I hear working, and I'm particularly involved with NHS trusts and also working with schools, both on the private sector through local authorities, but actually also working with private sector providers who supply educational services to the public sector. And what I hear from all of those is that there is a sense that we have the ability within this sector to change ourselves. I don't think people are waiting on government anymore to effect change. I think people recognise that there are some fantastically talented, creative, unbelievably dedicated, visionary people within our sector who have a very clear view. We talked about the supply issues and the question of price. Increasingly, I think people understand that the price of food is not just the cost in terms of the monetary cost. I think talking to people at the front line of serving patients in hospitals, elderly in care homes, or children in schools, people understand now that the true value of food is its nutritional value, is the quality of that food, is the ability of that food to play a role in a child having a good education, a patient making a quick recovery and vacating the hospital bed quicker, the elderly person having an enjoyable experience in their care home. And I know the same applies in the prison service. And so I think people, though outside the sector, we see this huge pressure of price. Within the sector, people are talking about value, and those values are changing. And when it comes to looking at tenders, the tenders, I think, this is not across the board, but are starting to be issued using words like sustainability. The dietitians are being involved in those tenders to look at the nutritional value of food, for example. And all of that is being equated into what the true price of food is. So I think we're at a time of change. I think there is a huge gap between the visionaries who are putting this into practice and achieving really, spectacular things on their menus, and we do have a risk that others might be left behind. But I think when you look at the leaders in the sector, I think there is such a passion to bring everyone with them. And that's why I said at the beginning, I think we have this 3 to 5 year process where hopefully, hopefully everyone is going to make many step changes in the years ahead.
Okay, thanks for that. You obviously identified an opportunity there, or opportunities, but also suggested that perhaps some are going to be a little bit more advanced than others. What do you think might help everyone to move in that particular direction?
Well, I smiled to myself being involved in this sector at this time of my professional career, because I know I talk to everyone as, sort of from the perspective of a country girl, and I'm passionate about British food and farming, and that's why I got involved with this, and why I set up Love British Food and British Food Fortnight, the national food promotion, and I'm really focused on getting Love British Food as the established promotional activity across the public sector. But actually in my 20s, I was a management consultant, and I specialised in something that was then called change management, which was all about how do you affect change in major organisations. And the answer, of course, is you inspire and enable people, and you take them on that journey. And I think what Love British Food is now focusing on, working directly with people in the industry, is how do you inspire and enable people along that journey. And so at Love British Food, we now have a number of initiatives to deliver that. In the hospital sector, we are setting up a network of farm visits around the country. We held 2 last year, and we have 4 in England this year and 1 in Northern Ireland, where we're inviting NHS caterers, NHS dietitians, and indeed NHS board members, senior nurses and things, to come onto farms and to see the value that British farmers add to their food, and have a discussion around the nutritional value you get from buying quality produce from British farmers, but also an understanding of the wider sustainability benefits. I mean, when I took caterers to 2 farms, we went to an arable farm, to a dairy farm last year, it was a real eye-opener. I mean, they were as passionate and as interested about hearing about the hedgerows and the increased diversity of wildlife as they were about the nutritional value of the dairy products coming from this particular farm. So so we're doing that in the NHS, and then we're also in the school sector, working with Derek Wright in Blackpool Local Authority. We have an idea to hold a Love British Food Sharing Excellence event, which is an inaugural event we're taking place this year, hosted by Blackpool Local Authority, where it's a platform really for those in the northwest of England who are doing some really fantastic things in school meals, to showcase what they're doing to school chefs who perhaps are working in isolation and do not have the opportunity for support and learning. The umbrella for all of these activities is 2 working groups: the Love British Food Hospitals Working Group, which is now co-chaired by Ian Robertson and Kushbu Naik from Sheffield, and the Love British Food Education Working Group, which is being jointly chaired by Derek from Blackpool Local Authority, and very excitingly by Linda Cregan, who not only, as you know, is from ISS Food Services, who do brilliant stuff with schools, but also is has been a pioneer in school education for many, many years. And the purpose of these groups is to provide a platform for those who are doing brilliant things to tell everybody else in the industry about them. So it's very simple. That was the change management principles I followed in my 20s. And it's funny how many years later, I seem to be involved with them again. But it's what everyone in the industry is saying is, because I know there's all this question of whether the government buying standards are going to be introduced or not, all seems to have gone weirdly quiet on that. But the people I talk to, they're kind of not even really interested. I mean, just, let's not wait for the government. The government's too slow. Let's just get on and do it ourselves. And that, I think, is why when you talk about challenges, I think we're at a time of real opportunity.
Okay, thank you. You mentioned the platforms that have been set up. What's going to be the best way for those platforms to work to spread the word as wide as possible?
We're having a lot of discussions around this at the moment. I think social media has become very powerful in this sector. We all have our suspicions about social media. I think we are all grown up enough to understand the fine lines between safe use of it and unsafe use. But I think within particularly the Twitter sphere, when they talk about villages and communities, I think there is now a very strong public sector village using that Twitter platform, and using it actually very productively, largely. And so when I have conversations with the chairs of the working groups, we are discussing about how there are some people using those platforms brilliantly to put out, I mean, at the simplest terms, images really of the menus they're serving. And, you know, an image, a picture tells 1,000 words. And it's a matter of trying to encourage more people to use that as a platform, I think. We also have what's now a really good online library on the Public Procurement Hub on the Love British Food website, which I really recommend. I mean, just if you're on a train or anything, take some time to read through the case studies of what some of the caterers are doing around the country. They're a really good read, and they're completely inspiring, and they're sort of toolkits really of, you could read that and think, God, if Jane's doing that, I could do that. If Ian's doing that, well, I could take that lesson from him, or I hadn't thought of that. So it's and then of course, you know, we have these events. I mean, when we go around the farms, it's not just putting your welly boots on and going around and looking at the cows. We gather for a working lunch. There's debate. There's going to be updates from the hospital food review team, from NHS Supply about their new dynamic procurement system, and from Cush and Ian talking from their perspective. And then you know, group discussions where people will share ideas. And I mean, one of the things that came out of the farm visits last year for NHS Trust, which was a really valuable takeaway, and it was such a surprising thing, was an understanding of how important that communication link needs to be between the caterer and the procurement team and the dietitian, and how even though they may all sit in separate parts of an NHS trust, when it comes to identifying new suppliers, putting more nutritious food onto the patient's plate, that working relationship and the ability to communicate and understand what everyone's trying to achieve is crucial. And what I find coming out of all of these things is, you know, we talk ethereally about big goals, you know, across our sector, you know, because we are dealing with, we're dealing with something that's fundamental to society. You know, it's feeding the young and the vulnerable, and yet when you break it down, it's the nuts and bolts, little things that actually enable this change. And to discover those nuts and bolts, quite frankly, you need to roll your sleeves up, get out there, talk to people, which is indeed what, you know, everyone who sits on the Public Sector Catering Alliance is doing.
Okay,
Times.
You've anticipated to a certain extent the next question I was going to ask, which was really about the value of collaboration. You've touched on it already, but not within sort of particular groups like the healthcare group and the schools group, for instance, but presumably those two groups in their own right would have some, could benefit from, you know, discussion, collaboration between them. Is that right?
Completely. And actually Derek Wright had the very good idea at the end of last year to invite universities to be part of the schools group. So the schools group is now titled the Education Working Group, and looking at catering needs across the education process. And equally, yes, with the NHS farm visits, I will certainly be publishing all of those to the local authorities in those areas, and suggesting that, you know, if they would like to send chefs to those. And we're also going to be doing a lot of work promoting all of these activities to head teachers themselves, getting head teachers to understand what's out there and available, and encouraging their school chefs to get involved. But within the Public Sector Catering Alliance itself, I've been involved with this. I was involved with it when it's called PSC 100. I've sat on a lot of groups, boards, committees over the years, and what has always struck me about this is this is a gathering of friends who are, they are not competing, they are people who have a genuine fondness for each other at a human level, and And when you want to make change, that is really important. And that's why I think the word alliance is a great word you've chosen, actually, David, because it is an alliance of everyone in this together, everyone with a common goal, everyone wanting to share knowledge. And I think that's very powerful. I don't get any sense yet that the government has grasped that. But I also think that perhaps we have the ability to effect the change ourselves from within, and the government can play catch up.
Okay, yes, and that brings me on to the final point. And I think from what you've said so far, we gather there's bags of positivity on your part, but do you genuinely look forward with a sense of optimism about what's to come?
I do. I am very realistic about the supply, and that's why I talked about a 3 to 5 year process. Interestingly, I think British farmers and producers have got as big a learning curve to go through in terms of what the public sector requirement is as the public sector has about what is available from domestic produce. I think for decades, farmers have been encouraged to look at the retail sector as their main customer, and the 2.6 billion public sector spend on food has not been on their desks. And it is completely unrealistic to expect our farmers and producers to suddenly deliver enough food for this sector. That is going to take time. But if I can use an example, which is a curious one, given I just talked about British farming, but we only, in this sector, people only really started talking about meat free 3 years ago. And I know I was passionately cross with you, David, about it. And so we mustn't be talking about meat free. We need to talk about, less meat, but buy more quality meat. And that's where you came up with the 20% slogan around that. But the reason I use this analogy is to say that during these 3 years, an entire market has developed in meat-free products. So that, for example, at the Leicester Main event, I'd say 80% of exhibitors were in that market space. Now, what I would like to see happen in the next 3 to 5 years is that 80% of the exhibitors at that event and other similar ones are British small, medium-sized enterprises, British food producers showing their wares. We are a long way from that at the moment. We are the start of an education process. I've talked about the work that Love British Food is doing to create the demand within this sector, the demand for British produce. An equivalent educational programme needs to take place to create the supply, to give farmers the confidence that truly there is a market here that wants their produce, and that they can then invest and gear up to deliver.
Thank you very much, Alexia Robinson.
Thank you, David.